item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Ray, if you'd lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll move to agenda item 2. This is a placeholder in case any committee member felt we needed to discuss the new superintendent contract in executive session. We're all pretty familiar with it, I think, at this point. We all set? All right, we'll move to agenda item 3 to approve the election and contract of the new superintendent effective July 1st, 2019. I'd like to ask Bobby to just give a quick run through of the contract.
Am I good? Okay, so we have Mr. Finn in the audience with us, and this is a rundown of his contract. It begins July 1st, 2019 and ends June 30th, 2022. His salary for 2019-20 is $135,000. For 2020-21, it's $137,000, and for 2021-22, it's $139,000. He'll receive 30 days of paid vacation, and he will not be able, or he'll only be able to accrue up to 40 days. Sick leave, he gets 15 days, which he can accrue up to 170. He has 3 personal days, 5 bereavement days for each, 5 days of leave for pay, with pay for each death in the immediate family. He receives 80% of premium health insurance for the superintendent's selected level of coverage under the MEA Choice Plus plan. The committee will contribute up to $500 towards the term life insurance plan. He'll receive 12% of his superintendent's salary towards his retirement plan. For transportation, he'll receive $225 per month. For his mobile telephone, he'll receive $60 per month. He'll receive professional development. The committee has agreed to 2 graduate level courses, up not to exceed $1,750 per course. There is, let's see, and that's it.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thank you very much, Bobby. If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion as written in agenda item number 3. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we approve the election and contract of Todd Finn.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Jensen and Ms. Hutchinson. Any discussion? All in favor? Looks unanimous. Thank you very much. Mr. Finn, welcome, and please introduce your wife and take a few minutes to...
Thank you. So as it turns out, I'm the guy that brought Danny with me. So this is Danny. This is my wife, and she's amazing, and she's my rock. So thank you very much. I also want to thank the school committee for having the confidence in me to continue the great work that Mr. Webster and his team of directors and principals have done. It's a never-ending battle to provide a world-class education for these kids. Also, just especially want to thank that amazing group of students who are on that panel. There they are back there, Mackenzie and crew, and RJ's over here. And I was telling my wife all about them, the principals and all the folks who participated in, I think it was in this room, and the big panels that we did as well. I thank you, you all so much for this. And going to go back to Vermont and be a principal for the next couple of months. I think we have a big snowstorm coming in. I'm pretty sure I just bought a house today. So go from there. Thank you. Right? We did buy one, right? Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finn. Any other comments from the committee? All right. Ms. Hutchinson.
I just want to welcome you to Lewiston Public Schools, and I look forward to seeing the progress we make going forward.
With that said, we'll move to agenda item 4, the consent agenda. Are there any items that members want to remove from the consent agenda? If not, the consent agenda will be adopted. Agenda item number 5 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items during that discussion. Comments that pertain to staff, personnel matters, or student issues should be directed directly to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments should be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Do we have anyone wishing to address the school committee on a non-agenda item? Thank you. And we'll move to agenda item number 6, a report from our student representative.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start out by saying thank you to the school board for allowing RJ and I and a select group of students to be involved in the interviewing process of the new superintendent. On another note, congratulations to the middle school cheering team who won first place out of 47 teams this past weekend. Another congratulations to Carolyn Adams and Asher Sueb for winning first and second place for the 2nd Congressional District of Congressional Art Competition. Carolyn's work will be hanging in Washington, D.C. until June of 2020. And additionally, this week, LRTC is hosting their first ever Spirit Week.
All right, so first I would like to welcome and congratulate Mr. Finn, who is outside. And like Fazla said, I had the pleasure of meeting one of the candidates, and that happened to be Mr. Finn, and he was the only one that I met, but I bet it was a great experience to meet all 3 of them. So I only have one thing to report tonight. So according to Naviance, which is a college and career readiness software that's used by the school for those of you who may not know, 36.5% of the senior class, which is about 148 students out of 406, have indicated on their Naviance portal that they applied to at least one school. And although the number might seem low, this is just like the number of students that indicated on their Naviance that they have applied to at least one school, but I'm sure there are more students who have. And that is it.
Carolyn's actually in the audience today. Could we give her a round of applause for her?
Is that it? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 7, the chair would make a request that a committee member move a motion to table that.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Hutchinson.
I move we table this item to a future agenda item.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Hutchinson, seconded by Ms. Whitlow. Any discussion? To the public? Back to the committee? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item number 8, to receive and consider an emergency change to policy IKA, grading and reporting system. I first would like to offer the committee a chance to make comments or address any questions, and then we'll put it to the public for comments and questions. Yes, thank you very much. But first, Mr. Webster will just give us a brief presentation, and then we'll move to the committee and to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did want to provide a little backdrop in that we have a number of people here that haven't participated in meetings in the past, and I apologize. We didn't really have the information out that members of the public should have been able to have access to. So by way of summary, last May, policy IKA was adopted by this school committee with perhaps the toughest credit standards in Maine. where we are requiring not only that a student maintain an average of 76 or higher, but also that they achieve that on every individual reporting standards. In January, we identified for the first time that the application of this policy was going to lead to a great increase in the number of students who would be failing. And the numbers based on the present policy in comparison to a year ago did show just that. A little over 1,000 are failing first semester compared to 500 of a year ago. Third point, to briefly where we are, a memo went out on January 23rd indicating that a change would be placed in having the grades be based on an average overall standards, not each individual standard. This memo, however, was not consistent with the policy as adopted by the board. And at last week's February 4th meeting, I recommended the school committee adopt a policy change where course credit would be based on a 76 or higher average over all standards rather than individual standards. The school committee ultimately tabled any possible action until tonight. Now, I think it's very important for everyone to understand that the school committee is understandably, or has been at least, upset and disappointed over much of what has happened. This includes last May, this body hearing assurances that administration would provide sufficient staff, professional development, and student support to maintain, if not further, improve student success. Also, there was no mechanism put in place until very recently to track overall student results to assess the application of this policy and what, if any, changes should be made to our system of supports and professional development. Thirdly, as I mentioned, a memo was widely distributed that arguably is in clear violation of school committee policy. And lastly, the board being in a place where they're being asked to change a policy after the fact rather than looking at a policy for the future. For the above, I apologize to this school committee. Specifically, I apologize for not asking the right questions or listening sufficiently to concerns that were expressed last spring about this policy direction. Secondly, I apologize for promising what we may be incapable of providing, and that is sufficient support to help students be successful under the present policy. Thirdly, I apologize for not having a mechanism in place that would clearly identify and allow us to monitor and adjust the real-time student progress. I also apologize for the distribution of memo that was inconsistent with school committee policy. And lastly, I apologize for putting the school committee in this position today. Where do we go from here? This is what I know. And I don't think that these next few points can be debated. Lewiston High School has among the lowest graduation rates in the state of Maine. We've made some improvements in recent years, but they remain among the lowest. Second point I want to make, and this I've been able to confer with some of my colleagues, but not everyone in the state by any means, but to the best of my knowledge, the present policy IKA has Lewiston High School with the highest passing course threshold in the state of Maine. The third point that I think we'd all agree with is that over the last several years, the state of Maine has passed, has amended, and eventually repealed proficiency-based learning requirement last summer. And that this lack of consistent direction from the state of Maine has created in school communities and districts across Maine stress and conflict. Along this same path, our policy IKA on grading has changed virtually every year for the last 5 years. Where do we go from here? I think that there are, in my memo that, in recommendation essentially unchanged from a week ago, is to change policy IKA to allow that the grade threshold still be 76, but be based on an average rather than individual standards, each achieving that. But there are other options. In my memo, I mentioned two other possibilities. One is actually reducing the threshold from 76 to 70, or some combination thereof. And there is also the option of keeping the present policy in place. And I want to just talk about and view it maybe a little differently than talking about the potential dire implications of whatever a board might or might not do. So I think an argument for keeping the present policy in place is if the policy expresses to a board member what the future direction of Lewiston Public Schools should be. And if not, then the sooner we make that change, the better, because there's nothing worse than having, yet again, a different policy every single year, and this will be year number 6. If we were to keep the present policy in place, and I know that there's been some great deal of reflective thought on how could we do that and best meet the needs of our students, and that is through providing additional supports, and we should be doing that. And not only we should be doing that if the present policy stays in place, we should be doing that even if the policy changes. So in my mind, the idea of increasing student support is something we should definitely be talking about and should be at the table, but it's not a reason in itself to change or not change the policy. So with that, I hope at least to provide a framework from which we have gone from last spring to today, the challenges we face, and I think that I, as superintendent, have spoken enough on this topic, and if there are questions that come my way, but this is a decision for the board with whatever input the board decides to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I'll now turn it over to the committee. Ms. Roy.
So I had a lot more to say, but Mr. Webster covered a lot of that. This committee, I had to go back and watch the tape from the meeting of last May 21st, where we were told that an amazing group of teachers, students, the Teaching and Learning Committee put together a recommendation, and that this was best for students and met the law, and that we should do so in a quick manner so that supports can be put in place and professional development could happen. I think it's kind of startling to hear how many times policy has changed. I think that's a problem. But one of the biggest things that we're dealing with right now is numbers are being thrown all over the place. There was a newspaper article that alluded to 800 students failing at least one class. When we asked for specific data, I was told 160 students are failing at least one year-long course and at least one semester-long course. 78 students are failing at least one semester-long course only. 595 students are failing at least one year-long course only. So that doesn't add up to 1,000, but like I said, the numbers have been changing radically all week. And my understanding is that students in year-long classes may have the opportunity to meet the standard before the end of the year. And since that's the majority of in the bucket that I just named, I think it might be too soon to give up on those students. Something I've not heard until tonight and in the past 2 weeks since this news was given to us is a strategy for helping students to succeed. These standards are not arbitrary, but were adopted and deemed necessary based on data and feedback for our students in order to help them be prepared for life after high school, whatever that life may be. We talked about this process being iterative. I took that to mean curriculum, supports, and practice would be iterative, not policy per se. Changing policy doesn't address the underlying issues.
Changing the expectations for students because they struggle takes away the point of learning skills and concepts that we deemed important for students to know in order to be successful. High-performing schools, including high-poverty, high-performing schools, do not set the bar lower when their students are not doing well. They help students get where they need to be. It's our responsibility as a committee to support that work. Finally, the most disheartening thing I've heard is that our students can't achieve success. If we continue to tell them that they can't meet challenges put in front of them, they are going to believe it.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Ms. Hutchinson.
Another number that was not brought to the public light is there are 41 standards who have received 41 students who have received a 0 in a standard. According to current policy IKA, a 0 denotes they've made no attempt at all to do the work. I cannot in good conscience reward those students for not doing what they're supposed to. I'm really concerned that we still haven't come to the clear understanding of what all these numbers mean. To me, it's looking like 238 students are failing a semester class. Those are the ones that have classes that have ended. Those are the ones that may not be able to recover their standards in Ice Week, Mud Week, or summer school because the courses are not offered. It's not the 833, it's the 238. Year-long classes go for an entire year. Standards are addressed multiple times in many cases. The other aspect to that is how many students are failing a course on because they're missing a standard that the teacher has just introduced. They've given one assessment. It's a benchmark for the teacher to know how her lesson planning or his lesson planning is going. And they're going to be reassessing it in the next week or so because they're still teaching the standard. Another thing is when this memo came to light, many students still had a 10-day window to retake. Many students did not retake because they figured the memo solved the problems. So I don't know that we still have a real grasp on the crisis that this has been deemed to be.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Any other committee member? Right.
I'm just hoping the superintendent might be able to answer the question on, it's been noted multiple times and in multiple ways that the policy has changed 6 times in as many years. Could you speak to how that was communicated to students and teachers at those junctures in addition to this past one?
I think that probably Assistant Superintendent Sean Shabbat is in a better position than I am. I will say this, I think that there was actually more work done last spring and this year than in the past, but I think also the change of last spring was perhaps the most significant one. But Mr. Shabbat may be able to answer that.
Hi, Alicia, what was your question? About the community?
How have the policy changes been communicated to students, staff, etc.?
I can speak to when I was at the high school, and I know a little bit about what Jake has done while he's been at the high school. We informed the teachers to share it with their students during whatever changes were appropriate, and then we also held parent forums during that time, and depending on the level of interest, there were a lot of parents that attended, and then there were times that we had few parents come in, and those also in the handbooks that students receive at the beginning of every year. So there was different opportunities depending on how a parent or a student wanted to receive that information. But I think the most important way it was addressed is through the faculty sharing it with their student body. And then during parent-teacher conferences with parents where appropriate, when parents would be able to attend those.
Any other committee member? One of my concerns from the start of this is, and I've shared this with Bill, and he's shared his response, but it's a disservice to our community for a student who should be passing not to pass. But I also think it's just as great a disservice to our community if we allow students to pass who shouldn't be passing. And that's been my conflict through this. That and it seems like we're always in a crisis mode. And I know staff feels that way. Trust me, we feel that way. And I think everyone's trying to get us out of there, including staff. And sometimes it doesn't feel like we're all on the same team, and no matter what the decision is tonight in the end, I hope everybody recognizes that we truly are, and this committee believes that as well. Any other committee members like to comment before I turn it over to the public? Mr. Jensen.
Mr. Chair, I just figured I'd touch on it now since a couple other people had spoken on it. I want to say, yeah, we have had a lot of changes in the last few years. So if you're a student, imagine you're like a 14-year-old, you're just coming to the high school, you've used a lot of different systems in the last few years. You know, high school, it's a lot to deal with, 14 years old. So raising the bar as much as we did, and it's not necessarily that we like just raised the bar. I mean, a 76 isn't exactly like a 76 in the older system. It's not quite like raising the bar. To me, it kind of seems like going from like limbo to hula hooping. It's just not the same exact thing. So I just feel like a lot of students, they're dealing with a system that I have some other comments about the topic. I'm very curious to hear what members of the public have to say. I just wanted to speak on that while we were talking about it.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. If there's no other comments from the committee, we're going to turn it over for public comments. Just a couple of quick ground rules. Let's try to keep comments brief, but take the time that you need to state your opinion. But let's try to keep it to 1 to 2 minutes. Try not to be repetitive, so if the person in front of you said, a list of things that are on your list, you just may, acknowledge that you agreed with those positions. And it's really important that we not address staff by name and not by position. If you have a comment about the system and the failure or success of a system, please state that. But you can, school committee members, we're the lowest paid here. When we have to take a little bit more, but our staff truly, there are laws that we have to follow. So nobody will get gavelled unless you go way beyond a couple of minutes. And if you're about ready to give a name or a position that identifies somebody, you might hear a gavel, but it's done with all due respect. And I'll try to be a little easier on it, but. All right, so when the public does address the committee, please just state your name, and it's important for us to know if you're a Lewiston resident.
My name is Samantha Garnett. I'm a Lewiston resident, and I teach at Lewiston High School. I also represent educators in the Educators Union here in Lewiston. So I stood before you a week ago when this agenda item came up on the school committee order of business, and even when asked directly, I wouldn't take a position and I wouldn't say which of the options I supported. The reason being, this came about so quickly. I didn't have informed information from staff, which is what I do as association president, represent the viewpoints of teachers and educators in Lewiston. Since then, I've informally polled the staff at the high school to at least give you that information to help inform your decision tonight, so you would have a foothold in what staff are saying who chose to participate. So upon review of the memo from Mr. Webster, 6 members of the staff voted in favor of the present language. 1 voted in favor of option A, 49 in favor of option B, and 27 in favor of option C. So you can see a clear majority leaning towards the average rather than individual standards. Staff did understand that this was not a binding vote. They have no sway apart from giving their opinion to help inform stakeholders that make the decisions. Just a couple of other points, and I won't belabor them because, again, I don't want to be repetitive. I think much of what was expressed by Mr. Webster and the school committee I'm in agreement with. Resoundingly, staff who took care to either speak during that time of discussion and question, and then afterwards who approached me individually, were thirsty for consistency, right? Thirsty for a policy that would stay in place beyond this year. So I encourage you, and I will admit I'm a little disappointed that the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee didn't have a recommendation to share, and that's not a personal thing. I was just eager to hear what their recommendation would be, because what I would hate to see happen for our students, parents, and staff is 6 months from now, 8 months from now, we entertain and go through another transition. So staff were very clear that they were seeking consistency. Concerns about the process have already been raised, but I would encourage this committee to see if you can separate the manner in which this has happened from what seems to be the clear desire of staff and what's best for students going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Good evening. My name is Mike Bernier. I've been teaching at Lewiston High School for 31 years, graduated from here in 1978. And I have to tell you, the last 5 years have been very, very, very discouraging as a classroom teacher. And I think I share the sentiments of many of my colleagues when I say we go home feeling like we haven't been effective in accomplishing our jobs. And part of that, I think, is the grading system. Now, I'm not saying this to focus on myself, but I've been arriving at school at 4:30, 5 o'clock for the last 31 years. I put my time in the morning while other staff members put it in the evening or in the weekends. That time used to be spent developing new curriculum or updating existing curriculum. Now it is spent just getting caught up on retakes and work continuously being turned in late by the same students. It is a very frustrating situation to be in. In my ideal dream, I remember when I was hired 31 years ago, I was given 2 sheets of paper. It said goals, objectives, i.e. standards. And I was told I need to teach these goals and objectives. And it was left up to me how to assess, how to weigh those goals and objectives, recognizing that some of them will be taught and learned well and some would not. But ultimately, the final grade was a deciding factor as to whether or not students got credit. I felt more creative as a teacher then. Now, I was reminded recently I'm going to be turning 60 next year. And I thought, no, that's somebody else. Okay? That never happens to us. But, you know, that's the reality. And the thought of retirement never even occurred to me until the last couple of years and the frustrations in dealing with paperwork upon paperwork upon paperwork. I would encourage a committee to consider at some point going back to the traditional system. As a matter of fact, just waiting in the car before coming in here this afternoon, I heard an NPR statewide superintendent survey said that 40% of the districts are going back to the traditional grading system, and 25 are continuing with a PBL or modified PBL system. Again, I ask that you just consider going back to the tradition. So trust me as a teacher. I know what I'm doing. I know how to teach. I know how to motivate kids, but I also need to be able to weigh grades to get the best results from my students. Thank you.
Good Good evening. Hi, my name's Donna Olson. I'm a social studies teacher at Lewiston High School. I'm not here tonight to talk about grading policies going forward for next year and beyond, but I am here to advocate for my students at Lewiston High School tonight about the policy for this year. I'm respectfully requesting that you please leave in place the policy that was adopted on January 23rd that changed the criteria for passing a class to an average of 76 overall instead of an average of 76 on each standard. First of all, we have many semester-long classes that have already ended, so reverting back would change the policy and make it so that students who maybe would have had a chance to pass if they had known that every standard was going to be counted, they would have maybe done more work or had made some arrangements in order to pass that class. Now that opportunity's over, so those half credits they can't get back. Secondly, I talked to both of my world history classes today about this topic, and I can tell you that my students really care deeply about the decisions that you make. The consensus from the discussion was that they don't want the policy changed again. It just doesn't feel fair to them. This leads me to my third reason. The decisions about how one earns credits have consequences, which means we have a responsibility to do no harm. When this policy was announced, my first thought was that it was good for students because it opened the door to earn credit. It opened that door a little bit wider for students who needed the space. To intentionally go back and slam that door shut on those students would mean intentional harm, and that's antithetical to what our goals as educators should be. We have a really strong community of dedicated teachers and professionals who, if you want conversations about what's going to happen next year, please come and talk to us. But for this year, I ask that you please leave in place the policy that was announced on the 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. There wasn't a change in policy. There was a memo. I'm not sure that the communication has been clear across the board. And just hearing that, the policy wasn't changed. Maybe you could help, Mr. Webster.
Yeah, I think if Ms. Olson had made reference to the memo that was distributed on the 23rd as opposed to the policy. The policy at this point was adopted last May. It has not changed. It requires that a student have a 76 or higher average on each individual standard.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. And Mr. Webster? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm Laura Copic. I'm a resident of Lewiston. I have a senior, Tiara, who's a senior at Lewiston High School, and I have a 7th grader at the middle school. And I understand the desire to want to challenge the students by raising the standards, but for students like Tiara, trying to speak for kids that are in like a special education setting at the high school, the changing standards and goalposts can be discouraging and lead to failure. At the beginning of the year, Tiara needed 6.5 credits to graduate in June. She has gone to summer school every year since grade 9 and has worked hard to catch up with her peers. This past semester, she got a 75 in a class that she, in the past, would have gotten half a credit for. In the past, a 70 would have earned her credit. With the 75, Tiara failed the class. Tiara needs to pass a majority of her classes this year to get credits and graduate. My concern is that the school system come up with a system that is fair for both general education and special education kids alike. It's important to get a good education, but changing the goalposts in a student's senior year is unfair and sets many up for failure. If the grading system is going to change, it makes more sense to change it when a student enters their freshman year of high school and continue with that new standard through the 4 years they're there. At this point, I think students like Tiara and her fellow senior classmates should be allowed to finish their senior year with the standards that were set forth their freshman year. If a 70 was acceptable then, why change the goalposts when they are almost out of Lewiston High School? And I thank you for your careful thought and consideration on this matter.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public?
Hi, I'm Angela Gilbert. I teach at Lewiston Middle School, and I also live in Lewiston. I just want to talk real briefly about what I think proficiency-based learning brings to the table. I think that I've heard a lot of comments talking about the grading system and how it's the current failure is a result of proficiency-based learning as a whole, and I think that there are a lot of us who don't believe that to be the case. I was here back right before PBL started and then kind of helped through the transition and feel like standards-based learning simply is having consistency among the different classrooms. Students leave different classes having certain skills. 2 is almost there, 3 you nailed it, and keeping, just not losing sight of the simplicity of that system and how that system does allow for creativity in the classroom and does allow for, again, that consistency between classrooms so students have a similar experience. And when they leave a certain grade, we're pretty confident in the skills that they do have. I think there are growing pains with what is passing, what is failing with the new system, and that there are things that need to be ironed out. But I hope we don't lose confidence in the good that PBL does bring to our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I think before we get off onto the tangent of PBL, we should be aware that PBL is not what's in IKA. The grading system at the high school is different from that at the elementary and middle schools. So I want us to be clear that we're not talking PBL here, we're talking grading systems.
You, Ms. Hutchinson. Anyone else from the public? Hi, thank you.
Rachel Natto, Ward 2. I also teach special education classes at Lewiston High School. In 1988, my husband enjoyed being part of the top 10% of his class, while I cried myself to sleep, not able to understand my algebra homework. He went to Bentley, and he's a really smart guy. So he does the taxes in our house and all the finances. And when the toilet leaks, I get to change the guts. Because I can solve just about any problem as long as it doesn't involve numbers. That's the reality of it. I want you guys to look at this from a different perspective. It is unrealistic for every student to meet every standard in every course at all times. We all have strengths and weaknesses. If I had to do our taxes, I could probably do it. I'd probably need to get a lot of help. I'd have to have somebody check my work before I submitted it. My husband would hire a plumber. That's just the reality of it. It doesn't mean that he's any smarter than me or I'm any smarter than him. And life is pretty good. We've got everything that we need to survive outside of high school, to do well in our adult lives. We've both done really well. If you're really serious about thinking about what kids need to graduate and survive outside of high school, I'm not sure that they need to meet every single standard in every single class. Now, I have students who are in the mainstream that I case manage. And for various reasons, whether it's maybe they had a tough go surviving their birth, or they had a head injury, or they have a genetic disorder, they are never going to read at grade level. Never. And so either teachers have to kind of fudge their grades and say, well, they've done good enough, or what? They don't graduate. We already have our basic kids who we know are not functioning at grade level, who are not getting a high school diploma under our current policy, which is not fair, okay? But now maybe there might be special ed kids who take all mainstream classes, and you're saying because they're not going to meet that one standard of reading at grade level, and they fail that one standard, that they can't get their high school diploma, when meeting that one standard may not affect their lives that much. They're going to go on with their lives, they're going to work, they're going to have families, they're going to own a house or rent an apartment, and they're going to be just fine. But they couldn't get their high school diploma because they couldn't meet that one standard. It doesn't make any sense to me. I support Jake's memo and a change in that policy for this year because it affects a lot of kids, a lot more than even, the kids are so stressed out about meeting every single standard that sometimes they just give up before they even, you know, if they're not contacting their teachers in the 10-day window, it's because they've already given up. They just figure they can't do it. So I support the memo that Jake sent out. I hope you change it for the rest of the year. And then after that, stick to something. Just stick to something so we're not all stressed out.
Thank you.
It's my first time. Lived in Lewiston 19 years. Been a teacher in Lewiston for 19 years. My son started as a freshman when it was called PBL. I have a daughter who is a freshman. So I'm here as a parent, number one, because family is number one in my life. And I'm worried about our kids. I'm worried about our students. I've heard the changing goalposts. And I'm worried about our teachers. I'm worried about our administrators. I'm worried about our school board. It's hard work. It's hard making tough decisions for our kids in our community. Our community has changed, and I think it's changed for the better. I also coach soccer, give my time outside the classroom as well. And I really, really am concerned of the morale of everyone. So we need to make a decision and get going and be consistent, because as a parent, I need to be consistent. As a teacher, I need to be consistent. As a coach, I need to be consistent and organized. I support Jake's memo. I support the fact that someone, or many people, want to help kids. However we get to that point, it needs to get done. It needs to get done quickly. Because when I walk out of school, being a 19-year veteran, and I hear from veterans that are tired and frustrated. And number one, the reason we're there, kids are frustrated. It's not fair to them. I hope you guys make the right decisions. And I really appreciate it, because I truly love this city. All right? You know, my mother was French. I'm from away. I grew up on an Air Force base up north. And I came here, and a little piece of Canada here reminded me of home. I love the game of soccer. I get to coach a bunch of kids that love soccer. And I get to work with our kids every single day. I do not regret going to school in the morning. We're going to fight the fight for those kids every single day, one way or another. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. If we could, please, we'll hold the applause. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen McCoy Richard. I live in Ward 5. I'm a parent of in Lewiston schools. I have a daughter who's a senior. I also have a son who's a freshman who's not in Lewiston schools. And that was a conscious decision on my husband's and my part because of all of this. So he's elsewhere succeeding greatly in a school that uses PBL. But they have done it correctly. And they have, they're very small, very hands-on, and so it's been very successful for him. It would not have been as successful for my daughter or my nieces per se, but it's been great for him. So I've been here right along watching this whole thing roll out. I've been on the high school PBL committee. I've been here speaking to you, and I've been pretty critical. And tonight I'm here to thank you, because this is the first time in the 5 or 6 years I've been coming to this podium that a committee has actually reached out and really, truly asked for the opinions of stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I mean parents, I mean kids, I mean teachers. I have been asking for that for 5 or 6 years now. And you've taken the time to do that. You've created committees, you've done surveys, you've had open forums for people to come and communicate. And the numbers have dwindled. We got a lot of keyboard commandos out there, right, that have all kinds of opinions but don't show up when the time is right. I hope they're emailing you. I hope they're getting their opinions to you. But I've been here, been watching, been trying to keep up with everything. And I'm incredibly frustrated at the way this all occurred. I think last week I watched the meeting and I heard several times that there's hardly anybody in the audience. And because we've created a community of apathy. The folks are just not invested in even bothering anymore, because we try and then somebody goes ahead and does whatever they want anyway. And I think we need to be super careful about that. If you truly want our opinion, then let's make sure we continue and focus on the task at hand. We don't circumvent things that are already in place. I know there's a committee working hard on it. For the record, I didn't want 76. I wanted 70. I'm a special ed teacher outside of this world. And I worried greatly for the students who are, my babies are just 4, but they'll eventually be here. And I worried about them. I thought 76 was too high. I thought if we were going to do 100%, we should go with 70. But I was on a committee, and when you're on a committee, you have to compromise.
Different grading systems, and not one has worked. Now, the question comes to mind, how do you solve this grading crisis that the Lewiston School District is currently facing? Do we go back to an average of all of our grades, as been shown to work in other school districts across the state? Or do we continue messing about with all these other systems? I think the solution is simple, and I hope you, fellow school board members, take upon an open ear to listening to students and teachers to what is in their best interests at school. And yes, I do support my principal, Jake Langless, on his memo on changing the policy to just passing of an average. It is shown to work. It is not shown at all, as what has been conveyed by several school board members, to not benefit the process of learning. It is instead a benefit towards having an average of all of our grades. For when placing a number on what you have learned, you first have to ask the question, what does the student know? And when it comes to mind, as a student like myself, over 12 years, we can accrue a lot of knowledge, but upon how do you accrue that knowledge, and how do you grade that knowledge? The solution is simple. We're just making it more and more complicated than it has to be. I hope you school board members vote within the interests of students and within the interests of teachers. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public? We welcome student input. I see there are lots of students here. Before we take it away from the public.
Mackenzie Richard, Ward 5. I just want to agree with my fellow students tonight and just saying that I think we have changed a lot. I know I'm a senior and I've seen several different grading systems come through and not work, and you know, we've had a meeting like this and everybody agrees that it doesn't work and we move on to the next one. But I think that Mr. Langless's memo is something that we could move forward with effectively, and I urge you to move in a direction that supports that and supports teachers and students, because we are all here saying that we think this is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public? And the other room can hear us, Sean, right? Okay. I'm just going to give it a moment for, okay. All right, very good. One last call. Anyone from the public? If not, we're going to bring it back to the committee. I open it up for committee discussion. Ms. Ray, start us off.
All right, here we go. So I think we've reached what might be called the point where it's the art of the possible from here on out. You know, we ideologically may feel one way, and that is how policy is made. And yet, as a school committee, we need to interact with our stakeholders. And when it comes to policy that has to do with grading and has to do with actual humans and students, I think we need to look at it in a different way than our intentions may have set in precedent. And so I hear everyone loud and clear, and I took copious notes, and I appreciate everyone who came out to speak tonight about what is going to work for them, their family, their students, and their community. And so I think what I'm hearing is that we should be moving the 76 to an average. I think one person put it well where, you know, this has been work done in committee. And I'm so proud of our teaching and learning subcommittee, which has been working so hard on this policy over the past year and some months, and gathering all that stakeholder opinion. I do feel frustrated and tired, as many noted tonight, in their own experiences, because that work has been done so well, and then a communication has changed that work. And that's really unfortunate, but it's where we are logistically. And so moving forward, I think I would be in support of moving 76 to an average for the remainder of the year. And I look forward to hearing what the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee has for future. Again, it's a change in policy, though. So we need to recognize that that's happening, and it's not great, and we should be avoiding that at all costs moving forward. But there are so many people who have taken time out of their lives to be here tonight and to try to communicate with us via email as well, or you know, I got stopped in Hannaford about 4 times yesterday. So I think we need to be respectful and responsive to that, even if it goes against our ideological belief.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. Ms. Hutchinson.
So I'm going to caution all of us that the recommendation did not come out of the Teaching and Learning Committee tonight for a reason. I would hate to make a change in policy now and then make our staff go through another change in a month or 2 when we come out with that recommendation. So I want to caution us to be careful. I will say that I also went back and watched the minutes, the meeting of May 21st, and it was explicitly stated that we would need to put supports in place to help our kids. If we did not have enough supports in place, then shame on us. 1, for not following through and making sure the supports are in place, and 2, for not doing it ourselves by policy. So I, for one, will not vote to amend the policy now. I will support a move to provide supports to these students to meet the expectations we set forth a year ago. We also have to keep in mind 833 students, according to the numbers that we currently have, is not 100% of our students. Therefore, another number of them did work. They did meet each standard, and they did get a 76 on each and every standard. And I would say to them, well, you know what, I appreciate that you worked and did what your job was, but we're going to reward the kids that struggled, and I'm sorry. Maybe you should have waited like the rest did. I'm really stuck on that, but I will not support amending the policy at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. RJ.
So I want to begin by saying I also support Mr. Langlis's memo of keeping the 76 as an average. I have not been here in the Lewiston public school system as long as my peers have, and I can sense that there has been a lot of inconsistencies in the policies, and that's also very frustrating for me because I am a senior right now. And one thing that I also want to talk about was that if I don't get, say, like a credit for a class, and I know somebody can attest in the audience that I always do my work and I always overthink because of my work, yes, and thank you. Say, this actually happened this year. So I took a test for physics, didn't pass it. It was way below passing. And I wasn't exaggerating, it was. And then I retook that test within the 10 days that I was allowed to. Didn't pass it. And that fell under one of the standards that my teacher provided. So is the policy saying that because I, like the number, like that's shown like in my power school right now says that I'm passing the class while barely passing. But I was barely passing, but does that policy say that I'm not allowed to get that credit and I'm going to be denied of that credit because like I failed that just that one test that fell under that standard? Like it's so unfair to me because like I work my butt off to, you know, try to understand everything in the class, but it just doesn't work for me. And if I may reiterate what someone in the audience has said, not everything works for everybody. I can't pass that, like every single standard that has been set for me. And physics is one of those things. I just don't get it. And no matter how many times people will try to explain to me like how I should do it, I may not be able to understand that. And I just don't think it's fair that I will be denied of that credit just because I failed that one test and everything else was passing.
Thank you. Ms. Roy?
RJ, is that a year-long class or are you done?
It is a year-long class.
I don't think students fail just because of one test, but I don't know the details. So the idea that we were told was that there are multiple pathways and students should have more opportunities than just taking a test to try to achieve a standard. I have to again go back to the fact that when we were told that this would be a good idea, it was supposedly vetted through teachers, students, and other stakeholders, and it was good for students and met the law. There weren't parents in the room or teachers in the room actually like this then when we talked about the policy changing then, and having this input then would have been super helpful in our decision making. So it's oftentimes reactive, and people want to change, and then we make a change, and then they're upset because there's a lot of changes. So it's a really difficult situation to be in when last May we were, you know, we didn't vote for this initially. We had the first reading, and we asked for more details. We had a second reading. We didn't vote then either. We asked for even more details. Finally, in May, because we wanted time for this process, for people to vet this out, for them to think it through, to make sure. So we make this change now without a recommendation. I'm nervous as well that there will be another change, and then that will fall back on us again, that we keep changing policy. So I just wanted to be aware that this board doesn't just sit here and make policy. We are consulted by the people who do the actual work. We're not in the schools. We get a recommendation, and then we trust that it's going to happen. After that, you know, we need information to let us know if it's not happening, and it shouldn't be the week that grades come out. So I just want to put into perspective from this committee, like that's the information we got and when we got it. And so it's really hard to hear that you need consistency. We've had recommendations through committees, and then it doesn't work, so just change it. I hope that piece of the struggle for all of us on the committee, it isn't because we don't want students to be successful. This is the opposite. We do.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. one of the big questions I have, and it's tough because we don't know exactly how the district is going to move forward with the policy, and I kind of understand Ms. Hutchinson's frustration, until that recommendation comes out. We just don't quite know. So anything that we do now could potentially be changed by that further policy recommendation. So that does have to be on all of our minds as we think about this. The big question for me is, and I would say that we do use a PBL system for the high school. In fact, that's what we had to do to meet the PBL diploma requirement law. Because essentially, if you have to meet every single standard at a certain level, you have to prove proficiency in every single standard, it's asking for proficiency. It may not be an exact PBL system. I mean, they kind of vary, but it's requiring proficiency. I think that's the heart of the matter for us. We have to determine, do we want students to be proficient in everything, which I don't think is possible to ask of students, or do we want them to just understand, enough of the subject matter? To me, it's if we keep the 76 as requirement for every single standard, it's keeping a PBL system. If we just allow a 76 average in the class, we're still kind of raising the bar from what it used to be a bit. We're still expecting more of students, but we're not expecting too much. Those students who just struggled in certain things, and I kind of understand where RJ is coming from. I failed physics too. And that was a class I didn't even need to take in a challenge myself. So it is frustrating too. So I definitely get it from a student perspective too, and I think we are asking too much of students. So I think as a district, and I think we've been able to make this decision for a long time. The PBL diploma law was changed about a month after we adopted this policy back in May, and we still haven't had a conversation about whether we want to continue with it or not. I brought this up several times. I brought this up last November. We still didn't have any conversation at that point in time. And then a couple months later, this came up. So I really wish that we had just had that conversation back in November like I had asked for. It's really frustrating. I'm sorry. I've worked in public schools the last few years, so I kind of see how a lot of this can impact students. I'm not a teacher myself. Hats off to you guys. It's a ton of work that you have to do. So I think as a district, we just have to decide, do we want to do 76 average of all the standards, which is still asking, I think, more than most students in Maine, or do we want to keep the PBL system that we currently have? I definitely support averaging the standards of 76. I think that's still asking a lot of students and that they can meet that. I just don't think that we provided enough resources back in May. That was the big reason I opposed the policy change back in May and voted against it. We just didn't have the resources to do this. To me, it kind of seemed like there would not necessarily be a crisis, but there would be a lot of students who would not have the supports they need. I've talked a lot about how I think we should go with a traditional grading system until we can properly implement a PBL system, and if the future of education is proving that you know certain things, then that's the way we go, but we have to get there. Maybe as a society we just don't put enough funding into education to get there. I don't know, that's a larger discussion. I just really think that we should average a 76 in all standards. It's still keeping a high standard for our students to achieve. It's not asking too much, and then we can kind of hone in on some students to do exactly what they're doing. Again, it's tough to know which direction we should go without the recommendation coming out. Let's see. Also, just bring up the fact that under a PBL system, like the way we have it right now is you meet these standards, and then you get the credit, and then the credits add up to the diploma. So if we're requiring standards, why not just get rid of the credits and just say, here are all the standards you need to meet, and if you meet all these standards, then you get your diploma. You don't really need to even have credits. So it just doesn't make sense to me to use a credit system and requiring students to meet every single standard. It's just totally unnecessary. Again, maybe in the future that's going to be required, that could be it, and then you could move to a more competency-based system. It's not just class time. A student may need about half as much school time as another student, and they can get through in 2 years. That could be the future. That could happen. We could get there. But we're not there right now. Resources are not there. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, just going forward, we've made mistakes as a board. I've made mistakes myself. We want to get as much input as we can here. So going forward, I think we all understand that the biggest thing that I think people want is consistency. Consistency. We need to get that. But knowing the way things work right now is I'm really not comfortable under the current system. So once we come up with a good recommendation, I really want us to have that discussion. I've said before we need to have more of these discussions at the board level, and I think we're doing that more, which is really cool to see. But we need to come up with a more definite solution and just kind of put the brakes on it and realize let's just not touch this for a few years. I know as a district we're kind of aiming towards that direction for our goals and our targets, what we want to do as a district, kind of limiting them down, being more specific, and I really think that could be a part of that. I know as a board, we're a relatively newer board, at least compared to previous boards, so we're always kind of learning some new things too, and we're getting really good, and I think just knowing the workshop styles we're doing, the way we're interacting, our relationships, that we can really come up with a good solution for the district in the next few years. We're really owning the issue like I think previous boards just haven't. Sorry for rambling here. I know this is kind of a wider conversation, even like going forward for next year and the future years. So I do support a 76 in all standards. I know there's been discussion about possibly increasing supports for students. Honestly, I'm in support of that, no matter what we do going forward here. Any increase we can for students is great. There's always budgetary constraints, which is, I mean, the biggest part of it. But any way we can help is good. Let's see. Yeah, again, I got a bit more of a discussion for next year, so I won't talk about that. I'll go ahead and stop there, and I'll just say that we didn't ask enough questions at the board level. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. Not enough questions at the board level, so I'll just kind of repeat. 76 average. I think we should go that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Anyone else from the committee? The goal, obviously the goalpost has been changing, and this all started with the DOE instructing us to make changes, but then providing districts throughout the state with little to no guidance. I anticipate that may change with the appointment of a commissioner that's not going to rotate out every 6 months, or to have no commissioner. But the frustration of our staff has been felt by, I'm sure, school committees throughout the state. Lewiston, I think, tried to be a leader in this once the instruction came from the state. But again, without guidance, we really put ourselves in a position to be a leader, but who struggled all the way through the process. So those are my comments at this point. Any other comments from the committee?
My comments very brief. I just want to be very clear that if the board approves a change in the policy tonight, there will be another change coming down the road, most likely for next school year. So I just want to be very clear on that, so that you guys aren't complaining about the constant change. And so thank you.
And with the change that potentially will be coming out of teaching and learning, the public will have the opportunity to weigh in at that point as well. And I would suspect the room will look like it is tonight, because that input also at that point will be really important. Something that we lacked last year during this decision process. Public input's very important as we work through policies. Thank you. Anything else from the committee? We have a couple of options produced by staff, and then a third option, I think that's there, or a fourth option that's there if none of these options are acceptable. So I'll entertain a motion. Ms. Roy.
So I would like to propose an alternative to Mr. Webster's motion. Motion to direct the superintendent, using reasonable resources within the budget, including the allocation of unexpected funds. Unexpended, sorry. Well, they're unexpected as well. The reallocation of funds and/or the freezing of certain funds to cover anticipated costs, also to support the superintendent in making needed personnel reallocations within his authority, including but not limited to the hiring of substitutes per diem rates for teachers and qualified educational technicians who work outside of regular contracted hours, and or other reasonable changes under the superintendent's authority in order to achieve the following goals. 1. Provide an immediate support system for recovery of standards for seniors, with the priority given to those who are failing only 1 to 2 semestered standards in a class in order to achieve academic success as written in policy IKA. 2. provide support for all students with the priority given to those who are failing only 1 to 2 semester standards in order to achieve academic success as written in policy IKA. 3, additional data to be placed in transcripts of seniors who have applied to a secondary education institution, which will assist in determining true academic achievement of the student being considered for admission. This could include the standards grade with an asterisk denoting which standards have not been met at the time of transcript but are being actively pursued for recovery. And 4, provide direct support to all students who are failing at least 1 year-long course in order to achieve academic success by the conclusion of the school year as written in policy IKA.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Roy, a second by Ms. Hutchinson. Do we have any discussion on this specific motion? Ms. Parks.
I think that this hits a lot of the goals that we're looking for, but I do have some questions. It sounds to me, and I may be just missing it, but this doesn't address the issue of the students who were in semester-long courses who are currently, under the current policy, failing. And so I don't know how we could put a policy in, or put an addendum in place to the policy that wouldn't fully address the issue. So if somebody could clarify that for me, I'd appreciate it.
So I think 1 and 2 actually do that, but it is a matter of, you know, what we've been told is capacity to help students who are in a semester-long course. They would be first on the list of people to help to recover those.
So if it's beyond the 10-day period for them to make up any of that work for the semester changing, are we adjusting that policy to allow them longer than the 10-day period? Because either way, we're sort of nitpicking and tearing apart all of our policies in order to fix one problem. And it doesn't feel right.
I would agree that it's weird. But because students really, I think somebody actually stated that their student thought because the memo went out that they no longer needed to do that. So we'd have to look at that as an option because they were not actually afforded the ability to make that up. That was kind of taken off the table for them when they thought that the standards would be addressed. So we may have to make an amendment to make that happen or a different change, but students were not given, I don't think, proper information to know that they would have to do that to pass because the memo, they thought it was a policy change and it was not. That makes sense?
So I would suggest that, just from my perspective, if we're going to be making amendments to any policy, it seems like rather than making amendments to a bunch of policies, that maybe we should just make a temporary amendment to IKA that allows supporting Jake's memo with the understanding very clearly communicated that it is a sort of temporary fix until the Teaching and Learning Committee makes their recommendation, and then we're not dealing with a bunch of changes leading up to one ultimate change. I feel if we're going to be amending anything, then we should just amend it in the most simplest way possible to limit confusion and offer some level of consistency.
So just help me understand. So you're suggesting any of the other options as a temporary?
From the original memo last Monday, option B, which would put it at the 76, but an average of all standards, with the understanding that that is temporary pending the recommendation from the Teaching and Learning Committee.
Thank you, Ms. Parks. Ms. Hutchinson. Ms. Hutchinson.
So the recommendation from the Teaching and Learning Committee, when it comes out, will not take effect until next fall. It will be the 1920 school year. It will not fix second semester here. So I just want to make sure everybody is clear on that. There's been too many misunderstandings, miscommunications, misinterpretations that we need to make sure we're clear. Part of the issue has always been with semester classes that there's no ice week or mud week recovery available because of the situation. This motion that, to me, allows us to make sure we have staff in place to meet these happier classes. I can't say whether there's going to be a grading IKA change coming out of teaching and learning. That's one of the points of contention that we're dealing with. And I don't want to get anyone's hopes up by using a reference to the recommendation going forward. because we're still not there yet. As much as we think we're close, every time we meet, there seems to be another issue that arises. So please, if we can take this piece that's going on today out of any discussion that's going on with what may come in the future, I think we'd be a lot better off, because I think it's going to confuse the two issues.
Yes, Mr. Shabbat. Hold on one sec. Is there any other committee member that? Ms. Ray?
So I'm just trying to clarify because there's a lot happening. This motion that has been moved and seconded would be to stay with policy IKA, which states a 76 in all standards in order to receive a passing grade for a class. This just adds in the layer of immediate support systems for recovery of standards, and it sets a prioritization level. Is that correct? I think this is something I could definitely support. I think the other thing that has struck me through this process is the fact that we need to be putting academics first in every scenario, and I think we do that when we determine athletic eligibility, but when we're also looking at other kind of extracurriculars, we should, because there's a lot of talk about funding in here and how we're going to fund this credit recovery. So I think we need to take into stock both athletics and other extracurriculars if that's the kind of funds that we're looking at. That's a bigger discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. Ms. Parks?
I have a question for Bill. If we were to go along with this, the motion that we have on the table right now, what is the likelihood that you could actually get staff this short-term notice in order to help recover these standards? It talks about getting teachers and adding per diems and all of that. What is the likelihood of you being able to do that in the very short time frame?
So I would call on Mr. Langley's or Mr. Shabbat to address that more directly than I. I do know that staffing for Ice and Mud Week has been an issue, but let's hear what Mr. Langley has to say on that point.
I have a number of thoughts, but to that question, we don't have the staff. We have staff that I actually worry about burnout because of all the extra supports that are currently in place during the day, standard support, after school standard support, other courses that are happening, Ice Week, Mud Week, Summer School. We have some teachers who work all of those. The semester-based courses that are in question, some of them are so individualized that we would be saying essentially to a ceramics teacher, you're the only one that can do this. So if any student are missing one standard, that teacher doesn't get any vacations or any time with their family or anything to that effect. So not only do we struggle to get enough teachers qualified in each individual area, especially in advanced level classes, in the semester-based courses, it's a specialty. So if one person says, I really want to take my vacation with my family, we don't have anyone to do that. Funding could be helpful to provide additional supports. I was uncomfortable in my chair when I heard things like reallocating, freezing potentially, to provide additional supports for something that I think could be resolved with a move tonight to support the memo, which again, there was some language that I used from policy to issue. In hindsight, probably would have gone about it a little differently. I do think it's best for kids. I do think it's fiscally responsible.
Yeah, I owe Mr. Gagnon. I've kind of slipped past him a couple times. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want a point of clarification because there might be some confusion. I look at this as amendment, but it's more of a charge. Am I correct on that to the superintendent? Can I ask that question to Ms. Ray?
Yes, absolutely.
So I got two parts.
Sure.
I got two parts to this, so I just want a point of clarification.
So Ms. Roy and I spent an effort preparing this potential motion in out of concern that no option would be chosen that was being presented by staff. And this would at least provide some student, the availability of funds to provide the resources to Jake to get students ready or to a point that they could pass. So, no, it's a motion basically a directive to the superintendent with an allocation of funds to support students should none of the options pass.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I think there was some concern or questions there. This is separate from the policy. It's to give support to our staff, teachers, and students to gain or get access to help. And I've always been in favor. That's always been my mission since the beginning, since I've been on the board, is to give support systems in place, especially after school programming like 21st Century and so forth, for students at grade schools, middle school, and the high school. This happens to be this scenario, and putting supports in to help get students to a level where they're meeting what they need to meet. So thank you for bringing this forward. Another thing, if I don't mind, if you could, because it's not very clear in here. I know it can be read a certain way, but I heard what you said, but if you could add like professional development in the first paragraph somehow in there, because if some teachers need additional professional development or even staff to not only for what they need today, but to get professional development if we need to support systems to build the after-school program or to help the students, in other words. So there might be some professional development to get us to that point. We even heard some of this slightly in the workshop that we attended today, and how that's been wonderful for those students and how they've become a team and a family. So I think there should be additional support systems after school for all our schools, all our students. And if we had done that previously, we would be in a better position today. I know I've talked to some of our staff here previously in the last year that once this policy went into place, we needed those support systems in place. It was crucial because we did know what had happened prior to this with all the changes, and in order for this to succeed, we needed these programs in place to help our students, our staff, and our parents. I mean, how many of us, what we're hearing are from parents. If we can't allow everybody to be on the same page and on the same team, it's very difficult. So I would be in favor of this. I don't know if you could add the clarification with professional development in there, but that would have to be added as well. So my suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, this motion is more of a response to the urgent matter of the student population. So it's not a long-term policy directive. This is truly just what I would call a knee-jerk reaction to the many students that are failing, and that if no option is chosen, this is just some type of safeguard to provide resources to the principal and the superintendent to hopefully help the students that are failing. Ms. Roy.
And I'd like to add, Francis, I think that we thought that was going to happen. Part of the conversation last May was that we needed to vote on this quickly so that we could make sure professional development was in place and supports were in place, because there was a concern about the language of 76. I mean, Ms. Hutchinson said it as part of the recommendation. Supports need to be in place for students who may struggle to get to the 76. So we weren't, nobody came to us before this memo to say the students are failing, we need supports, we haven't got enough in place. I mean, that would have been great to know in November so we could help sooner and put these things into place. This is an alternative to just hitting a reset button for the students who have worked hard and the teachers who have worked hard to get them there. It is something so that we don't end up, we're helping the students to get to where they need to be without changing a policy that we may change again, if that makes sense.
Thank you again. So if this is just for a temporary fix without knowing if we're making or staying with the current policy, we're only going to be visiting this again next year unless we keep systems in place to make sure our students succeed.
because the teaching and learning committee, well, Tina's got her hand up, she can answer this.
All right, because I'm not sure if I can support this, not knowing what we'll be doing moving forward. Because
Say the policy doesn't change for this year.
Correct.
This entire year.
But it,
We help students pass the way this is. The recommendation from teaching and learning is for now.
well, that hasn't been presented to us yet. So without knowing what the presentation is from the Teaching and Learning Committee or this committee, then it's hard for me to support something if it's just a temporary fix that we're going to say it's going to be a temporary fix if we keep it the same way.
I think, though, if there isn't support for the options presented by the superintendent. I was kind of hoping that we might, you know, a motion would be made about the options, and then if that none of those pass, we would kind of use this as a safety net. So I'm gonna Ms. Hutchinson first, and then Mr. Jensen.
Okay, so as far as the question goes on, we can monitor this. We can direct the superintendent to provide us monthly reports with how many students are meeting the standards out of the group of kids we're trying to help now. So there is a way to do that. They've spent the last 2 weeks building these reports into PowerSchool. So now we should be able to run them at any given time to track whether or not this is helping, hurting, or doing nothing. So that's a possibility. As far as going forward, whether we approve this motion or we go to one of the recommended from the superintendent, there are 41 kids who did absolutely no work and got a 0. I cannot, in good conscience, give them a free ride. Sorry, it just doesn't happen. So if we were to go with a motion made by the superintendent, it would have to include that if they got a 0, they don't get the free pass.
Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I could support the motion because I always support, I mean, any extra help for students, yeah, I'm on board. My concern would be, one, that it doesn't also average the standards to a 76th grade. To me, I can support the motion, but that has to be a part of it, or I can't support it. I also worry that I don't think we have the funding available. Again, I was hoping to hear that, you know, the funding is available, and that was one of the big questions I had tonight. I mean, thinking back to budget, I remember we had to slash the books, periodical supplies by, like, I think 2/3 or something for what it was originally recommended. So I'm just kind of hard-pressed to think that we have the funding available to help out with this. If we really want to commit to that, then let's fully commit. Let's do an out-of-budget expenditure. I mean, 50,000, 100,000, whatever it's going to take. If this is the way we want to go, we need to put the resources behind this. We can't implement a system that we're not going to properly support. That's the mistake we made last May. That's the reason we're in this situation right now. And so we need to put our money where our mouth is, I think, if we go that way. It just makes much more sense to adopt option B. Again, even if we adopt option B, our kids are still going to be at a higher standard, being asked to do more than most students in the state. They're still being asked to do more than most students in the state. Just because we're lowering it down from an expectation that we set a little bit too high, I don't think is giving anyone a pass, you know. It's tough to be a kid these days. If you have a 0 in one standard and you just didn't put the effort in, but you could pass by all your other standard grades, I'm okay with that. You don't know what's going on with these kids at home. They live tough lives. We just heard a program, you know, about an alternative program and how we have 92 students who would like to get in some kind of other program like that, who probably just don't do well in the system at the high school. Don't like what's going on, and they probably, it's easy to it's tough to start working on a class when you know that you just don't stand a chance, or you don't think you'll stand a chance. It's why put that energy in when it's so tough to be a kid these days. And why put that energy into that class if you know that you probably don't have a shot? It's just the way a lot of kids think, and so that's where a lot of 0s will come from. It's not a student being lazy. They're not an adult. It's a kid. They're learning. They're going to make mistakes. So I'll support the motion. I'd be more comfortable if we did an out-of-budget expenditure to go along with it, to make sure we have the funding available and it's not pulled from other necessary resources at the high school. But again, I would hope that it would be amended to also include option B as part of that. And then I would also state that, let's see, going to the motion For item number 3, it mentions that an additional data could be placed in transcripts of seniors who have applied to secondary education, saying that, you know, this is their average grade for the course. And then it also says these are the standards that they haven't met, but they're working on them. I think we should just include the average grade for the standards for the course. And then we can put a note that says that credit is determined by showing proficiency in every single standard for the class. So in other words, the transcripts, which I'm pretty sure is the current system, they would show just the average of the course grade of the standards, and then it would show for credit 0.00. To me, a college doesn't need to know that, oh, the student's not finished everything yet, they're still working on it. Because if you're a college, you don't have any guarantee the student's even going to finish, you know. You're like, oh, well, they're working on it. Okay, that's cool. So, no, just show them the standard grade. I think most colleges are going to realize, like, okay, this is about where they are in the class. Just because they haven't finished, they're met every standard. We at least have some idea of where they are. So I would like to see that part changed in here, too. So that, I mean, just keep it the way it is, which I think is just showing 0.00 for credit and then showing the average standard score. Am I right on that?
It could show that if that's what we need to do, as far as the standard, the average, and no credits. The catch to that, some schools will look, I think, at the semester-based courses that come to an end that show 0.00. Also, there's language for NCAA clearinghouse. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, but any class that's not completed in the traditional time frame, they don't award points for that in their system that connects to students' eligibility and scholarship funding at the next level.
Mr. Shabbat, we're going to move. You can come back with another request. Okay, Mr. Jensen. Mr. Shabbat, go ahead.
I would just like to add to what Jake said about the capacity. I appreciate what you spoke about, Ms. Roy, about this proposal. It's a compromise that I see us potentially moving forward with. However, my concerns are the capacity. When I was at the high school a couple of years ago, we had to cancel Mud Week, which was during April vacation, because we didn't have the teachers willing to work during that week because they simply needed time off. And I worry about us saying we're going to use money to ask teachers to spend more time after school, to hire subs, to take the place potentially of a classroom teacher so they can help students after school or during the school day. What about the students who are in that classroom who deserve the best teacher in front of them during the day? And we'll be taking that potential teacher out of the classroom to remediate other students, while the students who are there willing and waiting to learn have a substitute who will do their very best, but won't be nowhere near as qualified as that classroom teacher is. So that's concerning, both as an educator and as a parent of the high school. And again, I'm concerned about capacity. I know firsthand that we run standard support after school at the high school all year long to provide the things that you were mentioning earlier. Those supports are in place. Students can take opportunities at, but we weren't able to, for one core subject area, we were not able to successfully have that because we didn't have any teachers in that core area able to do that after school until just now. We've had Bates students helping us out with that. And it wasn't because teachers don't want to do it, it's that they're simply, like administrators, tapped out. And I really am concerned that if we just say we're going to do this without surveying our teaching staff at the high school, it will be a great idea, but then when it hits the ground, will we have the capacity to actually do what we hope to do? And, you know, we often say we're going to do it. We have the best intentions. We want it to happen for our kids. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes we fall short because it's a capacity issue. And I think we need to know that. Just like, you know, in hindsight, 2020, yeah, we should have made a different decision about a 76 in all standards. We know that now. But in May, when we presented it, and we ran it through the high school PBL committee, we ran it through the teaching and learning committee, we made the best decision we could at the time. Now, yes, it was a mistake. And I think we all recognize that it was a mistake. But I hope the committee, our school committee, can separate the process on how we got here to what's best for kids. When I was a teacher, and I know this happens in our classrooms today, when we teach a unit and we do our very best to lesson plan, and it doesn't go the way we want it, and more than half our students fail in that class, what do we expect that classroom teacher to do? Reteach, relearn, reassess. Not drive on and say, heck with those students that didn't learn it. So I think, in my opinion, option B is the way we should go. And I've heard some members say that. And also, being a member of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee, I think we know the direction we're heading. Now, I don't disagree with members that say they don't want to publicly say it right now, but we know that the direction that we're heading. There's no doubt in my mind the direction that we're heading. And option B is not a long way off from where the direction that we're heading. And so we can't allow, I don't think, our personal feelings, even though we feel like we may have got backed into a corner, to do what we feel is best for kids if we could separate the two. But if we go with what you said, Mrs. Roy, I would just caution us to know the capacity of our teaching staff at that high school. Are they willing to do it? And do they have the time and energy and effort to do it? Because if we say we're going to do it, and then we don't have folks step up because they're just burnt out, then we're back to where we are today.
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Ms. Parks and then Mr. Gagnon.
As somebody who voted against what? You didn't vote against, so you voted for it. No, last Monday. Okay. As somebody who voted against the motion last Monday to switch to the 76 average, I feel like we didn't have enough information at that time. We didn't have the complete data sets. We didn't have teacher input. We didn't have as much student input as we have now. I know that I would change my vote on that now. And I know that the alternative that was worked on today between the two of you, I appreciate the work. I'm sure it took you guys quite a while to come up with that. But I think that was presented as an alternative to option B. And so I'm wondering, I may be out of place in suggesting this, but I would suggest that we remove that motion that we have on the table right now and maybe approach option B first and see if we can get everybody to agree on that. And if not, then return to this conversation, just for the sake of time and sanity.
So, Ms. Ray, let's just have a quick rundown on that.
So in Robert's rules, we would have to consider Ms. Park's request, and it has to be seconded. And then you move on that because it's not that you didn't make the motion or second it, right? It's complicated when you withdraw motions. I'm pulling up the language for it now.
You could just amend, yeah.
If you want to amend it.
Let's keep the discussion at Ms. Ray.
What
Go
just
ahead.
happened? What was the question?
Well, I'm not sure.
Continue?
There's
Okay.
too many people talking, so.
Agreed. Boop. Sorry, I should know this. Anyone else a Robert's Rules of Order master? No? Shocking.
Let's keep it to the committee. Did you have a thought? Yeah.
What I had said was if the committee wants the motion withdrawn so that they can look at other options and put other motions out, this truly was an alternative because we didn't have one.
Okay.
So I don't mind doing that if it means that discussion for other motions can be put on the table. But Ms. Hutchinson also seconded it, so I don't want to take anything away from her.
I think I've been clear. I would agree to take it off the table at this time. However, I will not support one of the superintendent presented options.
I have an answer.
Okay.
Sorry, the suspense. So Ms. Roy can withdraw, as can Ms. Hutchinson, if that is your choice.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. And that probably solves it. All right, thank you.
If I may, I'm taking it that the present motion has been withdrawn And it would now be fitting for the chair to see if there's another motion forthcoming.
That's where we're at. Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Quartermash.
I believe this question is for you, Mr. Langlis. So, in reference to this motion, the alternative motion, I was contacted by a few parents who have children that once your memo came out, they kind of woohoo and abandoned any thought at recovering the standards that they were struggling with. So, I guess I just want Megan kind of mentioned it, but I guess I just want further clarification how you would foresee this impacting the retake policy or standards recovery moving forward for those kids that fit into this alternative motion.
Just for clarification, you mean if we go with a 76 average?
No, I mean with the additional support.
Okay.
The policy would stand.
All right. So we would have to backtrack without sitting and thinking it through and getting feedback from teachers. I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. There was 2 days remaining in the semester when I issued my memo. Wednesday afternoon, the 23rd. There was Thursday and Friday of school. Somehow, with additional resources, we probably have to open up that last 2 days, even though students have changed their classes, at least for semester-based courses. That would require some additional resources for sure. The time frames for that would be a challenge. Year-long classes, I think, would still have to have some kind of reopener. And I won't use a student's name, but an example we heard earlier about physics, that class with one standard not be passing because the curriculum does move forward and because there are time frames and constraints on when you can retake, because we don't revisit that standard all year in places like science especially. That student would still be at some kind of impasse and would need additional supports outside of the school day. There's a lot of data sets out there right now that were produced this week. Every student who's missing a standard or more would have to somehow satisfy that. I don't have the resources currently. I know I don't have the staff. I didn't have it before this conversation. I definitely don't have it after. And that's not a slight of our staff who work very hard and are committed to our kids. I think that they're already doing it because they're there. You know, I leave the school a lot late hours, and I see teachers leaving at the same time, you know, hours after their contract because they're committed to kids. It's not a great answer. I'd have to sit and look at it, but we'd have to reopen something back up. But I would also, I guess, emphasize that sigh, that, oh, thank God I don't have to do that. I don't think that was a push at teachers. I don't think that was a push at me or the school committee. I think that was them saying, I've been under too much pressure because of this policy that I feel like a weight has been taken off my shoulders.
I thought that was a round of applause for a second. Thank you very much. Ms. Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think there's a lot going on, so much going on here. And the part that has totally moved me into the option B camp is hearing that we don't have the capacity. Even if we throw money at this, we're hearing from administrators that we don't have capable individuals who can teach the recovery. And that is a problem to be addressed separately, I think. We have to figure out what's possible from this moment moving on. Like, there's so many shoulda, coulda, wouldas that in the world, but I think we have to set something that just moves us into the next semester for folks who, unfortunately, their class already finished on the 25th, it sounds like, and so we're way outside of the realm of the makeup period. That would be customary. I also just had a concern pop into my head about how putting resources into the alternative addendum motion would impact our unions, and I don't know that we've run any of that by them, so that concerns me as well. But I am more firmly in the option B camp at this point.
Okay, so at this point we're discussing a motion that's been pulled. Mr. Gagnon.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I have a point of clarification with Ms. Hutchinson, if you don't mind. And you had mentioned a couple times this evening, and once to me as well, when you say, if you don't mind, you mentioned that there are several students that have zeros, flat out, just never did anything. There's just flat out zeros. Even if we went with option B, they're still going to have zeros. Is that clear? No? Could you clarify that then?
If they have a 0 in one standard, option B would automatically pass them.
So let's,
well, that brought up some attention, so.
Yeah.
But still, can I finish? We would still be rewarding a student for not making an attempt.
So Jake wants to address it. Do you want it, or?
Well, if I could just first.
All right, are you all set? Okay.
So option B, which is referred to my memo, still requires a average of 76, and it's pretty difficult to have a 0 on a standard and still have an average of 76 or higher, unless you get 100 on everything. So those 41 students, and maybe Mr. Lang is familiar with them, they're going to be likely none of them that would be impacted by a policy change.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, actually, it is mathematically possible, depending on the number of standards made, for them to have a 0 in a standard and still average a 76. It is mathematically possible, and I did it with only at a 90.
But the odds of them being 46 students probably are not great, but I'm not the pro, so if Mr. Langlis would like to chime in on that quickly.
I would have to look at individual student data to give you a conclusive answer, but I would concur with the superintendent that any student who's above a 76 average for the class, it is mathematically possible that they have a 0, but it would mean that they're doing at least pretty well in many other standards, especially where most classes run between 10 and 15 standards. If you have a 0 in one, it's 10% of your grade.
And I just want to check with Mr. Gagnon that you asked for that point of clarification. Was there any other comments you wanted to add to that, or are you done?
I'm all set for now, but thinking that through. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen, do you have your hands raised?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm just thinking too, if we don't make any change in the policy, we're going to be in the same exact position next year. I don't think the problem is our students. They're not the problem. The problem is the policy that they have to follow. This time for the first year, the highest standard of any school district in the state. Again, they're being asked a lot. So even if we go back to the 76 average, I just want to reiterate that we're still asking a lot of them. We're still holding them to a very high standard. So I don't want us to stick to our policy basically on principle and think that if we make the change, then we're backing down on the principle. We're telling kids that we're sending the wrong message. It's just not as black and white like that to me. I think there's more gray area. When you look at kids and what's going on in their lives, they're human beings. They're not robots. There's a lot of stuff going on, and so I mean, it's still a very high standard. I just feel like we're that we'd stick to our principle alone of the standard. We're just going to stick to our principle and just kind of not realize. I mean, if we have to balance sticking to our principles and kind of harming the futures of a lot of students, which is it's going to happen. If a lot of students don't pass, I mean, sure, they may do like credit recovery, they may bounce back, they may get into lesser colleges than they want to. There may be other consequences in life, could hit their ego or self-esteem, things like that. Again, we're asking a lot of them, and if we don't give them kind of a fair shot themselves, then we're kind of gonna, it's not the word I can say it in public, we're throwing a lot of students under the bus. You get what I'm saying. You're picking up what I'm putting down. I just don't think it's really fair, and we're just going to hurt a lot of students. The impact is going to be disproportionate to, I think, sticking to our principle, and we're going to realize we're still asking a lot more of them than any other student in the state.
You made, Mr. Jensen, if I could, you made that point several times over the evening. So
yeah.
And I mean, if somebody's prepared to make a motion here, it might be a good time so we can discuss a motion.
I will gladly make a motion to adopt option B.
All right, there's a motion to adopt option B, which was provided by the superintendent's office. Is there a second? Are you, and we will, just for clarification, are you seconded or not? You raised your finger.
Can I second it with the caveat that it is known that this is going to be communicated very clearly, that there will potentially be another change coming by the end of summer, so that that's not a surprise when that happens? And that maybe if the Teaching and Learning Committee for some reason doesn't have a decision by the start of the next school year, that it'll be known that it will revert back to the current policy, so it's just a temporary fix and not a permanent change. I don't know if we can do all of that, but that was the question I had for
Mr. Jensen is nodding vigorously, so I would suspect that that would be part of his original motion. Mr. Jensen, could you read specifically option B?
Mr. Chair, option B reads that the language of policy IKA will be changed to an average of all standards. At retaining the average grade of 76.
So we have a motion by Mr. Jensen, seconded by Ms. Parks. Any further discussion? Ms. Roy.
I just want to clarify that it isn't based on principle or digging your heels in. It's basically saying this doesn't solve the larger problem that students aren't meeting the expectation. That policy gets brought to us, that they say is fully vetted, and that we go to implement, it doesn't work, they ask for a policy change, and the cycle continues. I just am afraid that that will keep happening and this problem doesn't go away. It isn't because I don't want kids to pass. I was trying to figure out a way how we could support them and still figure this all out. This is really a difficult decision to make because I feel like it's the same decision we keep making on emergency basis. On the newest data, I don't trust this data at all. It's different all over. And I know that students have gone back to teachers and said, you know, can we take a look at this standard I failed? Oh, I actually didn't put that in. You actually did pass. And I know that has happened. So it's because everybody's confused. So I'm trying not to muddy the waters even more. But it isn't on principle. It is trying to fix the issue for a longer term strategy.
Ms. Roy brings up, I think, some really good points, because I think any vote would have been a close vote, I think. So that clearly is sending a message from this committee. Ms. Whitlow.
Thank you. Finally had a chance to talk. I tried. That's okay. So Ms. Roy has brought up some really valid points that, you know, we might not be fixing the problem. And I want to address the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee, an issue that I'm having, and I can't speak for Renee and Tina, but our Teaching and Learning Subcommittee needs to have more stakeholders involved in that. And we, as board members, cannot make good recommendations if we don't hear from more teachers. This evening, we had a couple teachers that did come and sit in. Fantastic. I appreciated that. They were one-sided in a sense. I'd love to have more people on the other side. We cannot make decisions if we don't have all the information. If we're only getting the information from this group or this group, we don't have it all, we can't do our jobs effectively. And it bothered me a little bit tonight when the information was said that we know what direction we're going in that subcommittee. I don't think so. I really don't think so. We may have thought so last week, but then when we all came together as a group, we were all over the place. We didn't know what this recommendation was. How do we interpret that? We all interpreted it differently. That's not okay with me. I'm not bringing anything to this board unless we're really sitting and talking about everything. It's not fair to our teachers and our students. So my recommendation would just be that if you have some strong views as a teacher, because you're in there every day, we have to hear from you. Not just in a survey, you know, because what does that really give us for information? Not a whole heck of a lot. I heard some great teachers this evening that are on a totally different perspective of what we're hearing in our Teaching and Learning Subcommittee. So we need more information from you guys, and or we're going to be dragging our feet in this teaching and learning subcommittee until 2 years down the road, because we're not bringing anything to this board until we know it's going to last.
Some very good points. Thank you. Any further committee discussion? If not, we have a motion on the table. All in favor? That's okay, Mr. Webster.
So maybe I could try to, what I have in my notes, and you tell me if this is an accurate reflection. So the motion is to amend policy IKA to read each student must earn a grade of 76 or higher average to receive credit, and that this change be clearly communicated as a temporary fix for this school year only. Period.
All right, with that explanation there, if everyone's comfortable with that, I'll again ask for all in favor. All opposed? 4 opposed. Yes.
So, what is the work that happens now? Because we say that, so do the grades have to be re-averaged, or is it the one that's showing in Power School? How do parents know what's happening with their kids?
Yeah, with this shift, when a student or parent looks at a grade, if they see a 76 or higher, they'll get credit. Grade average. Yep. A quick lookup page.
Thing just to keep in mind, when I talked to my 17-year-old about this, he was much in favor of the rest of the young people in here. He doesn't look at the standards in Power School because he looks at it on his phone. He sees the average and thinks that's his grade. So I think there really has to be a lot more. I mean, we had to sit together this weekend and go through every single standard, and he hadn't seen that before. I never think that my son is innocent of everything, so he might have let some of that go at some point, but I really would hope that teachers can take just a little instruction time to sit and have everybody just open up Power School on their laptops, see where everybody is. If you really want to pass, it's up to you to talk with your teacher. And teachers, I hope that you would give them that a little bit of time and make sure they're aware of where they are, and then they can talk to their parents about it too. And I'm hoping the community will come out when the Teaching and Learning Committee comes out with their recommendation to say how you feel like you did tonight. It helps us so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I go to agenda item 9, if people would like to leave, I'm not encouraging it, but if people would like to leave, I'll give you that opportunity.
Mr. Chair, can we take 5 minutes?
Sure. Yeah, we can take 5 minutes. Thank you.
So I was gonna try to make this really, really brief, but I just got a text from the sitter. My daughter's asleep, so I could go all night. I'm just kidding. I'll be brief.
Let me see if I can over.
So before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank the committee for that discussion and the opportunity to hear from stakeholders. So I know in the chairs that you're in, that was not a easy conversation, or, you know, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you do as the lowest paid employees in the district. So just a little background, I included a memo in the school committee agenda, or attached to the agenda, that just kind of gives some history that during the negotiation cycle last year, we negotiated in a part-time release for the president of the Lewiston Education Association. We represent both the Certified Professional Staff Bargaining Unit and the Ed Tech Unit, and many people aren't aware that in the 4 years that I've been president of LEA, there's been an increase of over 200 positions to those units, which puts us really, really close actually to Portland, and Portland has a full-time release and has had for about 20 years. So personally, I just want to again thank the negotiations committee. This has made an incredible change in my family life, which I'm very appreciative of. And it has also given me the space to rekindle my love of teaching. Not that I ever disliked it, but I'm just pleased to be in the position. So I just wanted to thank you for that. As a result of those negotiations, we met as a leadership team of LEA with some district leaders, so with Superintendent Webster, CAOs, Bobby Avery and Sean Shabbat, and also with some of the negotiators from the school committee, and we discussed collaborative goals. So I just want to be clear, there is definitely association business that we do distinct from the public schools. It's part of our responsibility to our members, but this meeting was to discuss collaborative goals that the release time would give flexibility to help support in district. So I'm not going to read them to you. I'm not that kind of PowerPoint chicka, so I'm just going to put them up there. Here's a handful. I'll talk about some of them with some supporting detail. And if you're okay, I'll progress and just give some support. So one of the things that we discussed in our joint planning session was the need for support, or the desire for support, as Martell and Longley become Connors Elementary next year. You know, the administrative team there, Sarah, Charlotte, and Dawn, have really undertaken a Herculean task this year to move towards transitioning their students and their staff and creating a shared culture at Connors, and, you know, kind of ending the era of Martell and Longley. That task, I think, was complicated by some unexpected issues, but I was happy to be a part of some of the work and continue to play a role. We have revitalized the liaison committee at Martell and increased member engagement there, trying to raise concerns at a building level so that they don't escalate. We have also, with the support of the superintendent, we hosted an unstaffed meeting for Longley and Martell, like really well attended, really awesome event where they got to socialize with staff from the other building, and without an agenda, without you know, things that they were supposed to discuss, they got to sit, meet, talk over food. Really well attended, really good review and feedback on that. We also leveraged some of our National Education Association resources. The NEA has for years done American Education Week. And American Education Week is in November, and it's an opportunity to highlight some of the support staff and other players in the education community that often are like the unsung heroes. So we were able to have in both buildings a parent day where parents could come in and participate with the community circle in the elementary classrooms if they wanted to, and then after had refreshments and could talk with administration about hopes and aspirations for Connors as they transition into that building. In that week as well, we also did cute little things like we made a coloring book for support staff that raised awareness for younger kiddos. This is what my custodian does in the building. This is what my assistant does in the building. For the older students, I wish I had taken pictures, they created thank you notes that were in the shape of a flower and then delivered them to assistants or cafeteria staff. And that was, I still see Miss Giroux at Martell still has hers hanging over her desk, so it's really sweet. We continue that work. I'm super sad that Wednesday is probably, I'm not going to speak for Bill or Sean, but most likely going to be a snow day, because we had some really great things planned for a visioning conversation and the shared staff in that early release day, where there were facilitated conversations about what staff were thinking about, hoping for, what they felt like they could contribute as they come together as one staff. So I'm hopeful that that will be rescheduled, but would love to be continued in that planning. Every year, so this isn't new or distinct given the release, but given the release, we were able to bring this a little bit more to life. Every year in the Certified Professional Staff Contract, we are able to co-host with the district and have a breakfast that welcomes new staff into the district. We had over 30 members from our existing bargaining unit that are tried and true blue teachers, right? Who were there to greet people from the new buildings and to make sure that they had a friendly face for the first day of school. So that was really well attended for, obviously for the new staff, but for our people that were there to support new folks. And we really tried to up our game and make sure that we had a community of support for them. Additionally, the EdTech orientation, Mr. Webster agreed to allow us to address EdTechs and also to be present during that time as officers. And again, just to build network and community for staff that are coming back as EdTechs and not, salaried staff, but also for new staff. So just some success there. Starting this coming month, we have written and received a grant for early career learning labs here in Lewiston through the NEA. I worked with Sue Williams and Sean Shabbat on getting approval for this and putting it together, and we do have an educator who's going to be the local facilitator here, which means that they will be working with some of our early career educators, putting together a cohort of staff who are going to identify together a problem of practice, work through that problem of practice, have professional support, coaching available to them, resources through the NEA. And it goes, I think Sue and I have talked about this at length, that this iterative process of try it, reflect, research, talk about it, and make adjustment, right? Like that's the whole underpinning of this. The nice thing about the early career learning labs is that it is relegated to staff in their first 0 to 3 years in the profession. And obviously that's in Lewiston as well. So some of our brand new teachers will have an opportunity to make a cohort and build relationships amongst themselves. And Mr. Webster, I'm not going to speak for you, but I know we've talked about this and how like if this goes well, maybe we think about this model for our teacher induction going forward. So some other goals for collaboration, because I didn't want to hit you with them all at once. And so the time that the release grant has given me to be in different building spaces is invaluable. To be able to connect with administrators that prior to I would need to go out of my way and find time during my prep or before school, or I just felt like I was always on panic, right? Like running from one hectic thing to another, trying to make sure that I was building relationship and getting it right. To have that burden lifted a little bit and to be able to have the time to build relationship with building administrators, with directors in some of our programs here in the district, but also with you folks too. It's opened up some time for communication that's a little bit less restraint from a time perspective. So one of the things that we were able to do, I think that specifically was support for our ed techs, our support staff in this district. We were able to collaborate with a building administrator and central office administrator to provide Lewiston exclusive professional development for our ed techs. So the ed techs were solicited to come. The district offered to pay for lunch. We bought breakfast, which is a lofty way of saying we bought donuts. And we provided the professionals to do some professional development for our folks who needed some clarity on their roles, needed some clarity on boundaries and how to make sure they weren't putting themselves in the district at liability, and dealing with difficult students. We had some MEA people come in and conduct that training. It was really well received. We also weaved in through conversations with the special ed director in the district, there was a need for an opportunity for trainings for our BHP hired ed techs that maybe were not quite in line with where they ought to be. We utilized that half a day Saturday to make sure that we had a space in the library specifically for those staff. There were 7 of them that just sat there, worked on the computer, and worked through some of their BHP modules to bring them up to where they needed to be working with that caliber of student. We believe so much actually in this mission and vision of being collaborative with the school department that we even had like our our communications person draft a logo that really just put it out there. Like when we intend to do stuff together and we're going to be intentional about the time and the planning to be on the same page and to work towards things together, we're going to brand it. And this is like pending approval, of course, but I just thought it was neat to show you. Well, actually, did we approve this bill? There it is. There's more on this. I'll show you that in a second. One of the things that we wanted to do personally as an association, but I think there's definitely value in it indirectly for the district, is to get a little bit more in touch with our members and to springboard or catapult this opportunity to get to know our members a little bit better with this release time. And we did that in the fall with a listening tour. We had over 180 conversations with staff in the district. Most of those were support staff heading into negotiations. We wanted to make sure that our negotiating team had the information that they needed to bring relevant issues and to speak for our members forward and our potential members. There was tons and tons of meaningful data that we collected during that week. That qualitative data I go back to again and again as an association leader to try to identify and work with natural teacher leaders that just need an avenue. We have a brand new committee chair. We have increased the number of members on our committees, which of course are working for goals of the association, but the goals of the association are student-centered and moving towards improved education in Lewiston. That week capped off with our first of 3 socials this year. We had a former Lewiston educator playing songs in the park and had a nice little get-together, and we really pitched the ed tech professional development day there. So we've heard loud and clear from our members, just like I'm sure you've heard loud and clear from elementary educators and probably right up through middle and high school, that social and emotional learning is something that is needing attention, right? Not just in our schools. It's not a Lewiston unique problem, but it's exacerbated in Lewiston by some of the issues that we have in our community. And I see it as an opportunity for us to do something really amazing and collaborative together. To that end, one specific note that I can pull out were the visitations to the Rise and Shine program at East End Community School in Portland, which I know a couple of you were gracious enough to give of your time to go to. Follow-up work on that. Mr. Webster and I have identified a pilot school for that for next year, and we'll commence meeting with that administrator to work on a pilot program starting small, as was the recommendation from the administrative team at East End, but really trying to put something into place that will not just address behaviors that are happening in the classroom, which are difficult for teachers and support staff to handle, but hopefully to mitigate them and to be an avenue for students to engage in something they feel really positive about first thing in the morning. Adding to what we talked about a couple of slides ago, association and administration collaboration. I'm sure some of you who were on the negotiations team can remember some concerns that have been shared, or maybe just in past conversations with administrators about the liaison team. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure was a goal that came out of this release time is that we were all on the same page with that we had the time to sit down and have meaningful conversations. So I've had dialogues with administrators about what their concerns about the liaison process have been, and have worked with our liaison teams to address that and to really drive home the new language that was added to the contract. So if it's not, fresh in your mind, the new language that was added is it's the understanding of the certified professional employees. That's the underline there. That communication will be respectful, professional, and productive and delivered with a positive tone. So we've revamped our liaison committee presentation that we do in school sites to make sure that that is sort of like the pinning, right? The underpinning of the process, that it is part of our professional contract. So it's our professional expectation that we're not using it as an opportunity to be unkind to people, unkind to folks. I feel like that's been received well. And I hope that administrators feel the same way about those liaison trainings. But I feel like the natural result there, if you work with your building administrators and your staff on how to utilize that forum, it prevents issues from raising to higher levels, right, and being dealt with at a superintendent's level or through a grievance or something like that. And it strengthens the solutions-based problem-solving team within each school building. So we had done a training, myself and the committee chair for the district-wide liaison for LEA. We presented at Longley Martell at a joint staff meeting in Montello. Would happily do it at any other building, but I feel like there was some great Q&A. We even did like a little quiz. Most of the teachers met the standard. But we put out there examples of what were appropriate liaison concerns and what were things that maybe the team should toss in the bin or request rewording, right? So that way your message and your issue was heard and not the tone. So that work is ongoing. I think that leads into this. I'm really proud of the ability to be able to meet with administrators and directors face to face. Something I can think of right away. The new human resources director, Monique, and I are in and out of each other's office all the time, trying to make sure that people are taken care of, that issues that do arise, we're on the same page about before they become issues, right? When they start out this big, that we talk about it, discuss. I would say the same thing for Bobby and for Sean. Bill's never in his office, so I don't know. I'm just kidding. No, but I would say there's a pretty good open door policy here at Dingley. So if there is something that seems to be an issue, it's easy to go knock on someone's door and beg a few minutes of their time. Sometimes that resolves something, and other times it brings something up that needs attention, and it becomes a groupthink issue. But if you take a look at the numbers, I beg your pardon, because in 2015-16, I don't know exactly how many grievances there were, but there were a lot. Oops. And one was resolved through a costly arbitration. In 16-17, there were 3 grievances filed from LEA, and all were resolved at level 2. And then 2017-18, there were 3 grievances filed, 2 were resolved at level 2, and 1 was resolved at level 3 at a board hearing. So flash forward to this year, though we're only halfway through, we have only filed 1 grievance to date, and it was resolved, in my opinion, very collaboratively at level 1, with lots of informal back and forth between people who are involved with that. So that, I'm proud of that, and I don't think I'm betraying my membership by saying we're just not filing grievances. I think that we're being proactive and practicing what we preach when we say we should be having dialogue and conversation about what's best for staff and taking care of staff and what's best for students in turn. And one thing here, forthcoming, to that end, Mr. Shabbat and I have had some conversations about perhaps it would be beneficial, given that we have a lot of newer administrators in the district, and just every discipline situation with personnel and employees are different. So there's always a learning opportunity to look at, unique scenarios or to think about what would you do in this case. Our intention mid-March is to present to the administrative team a joint discipline workshop where there is some information. Did you get that? Where there's some information presented that we can agree upon, which is from law, from the contract, from our joint interpretation, but then also opportunities for working through gritty situations or just dialoguing about possibilities. I'm excited about that. Yeah. And one of my favorite things that I was able to do this year, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, it's just like a snapshot of some things that have been going on in my world. Every year, the MEA, the Maine Education Association, writes and receives a grant to purchase a book for every first grade student in the state of Maine. So in years past, I've put them in our office mail or dropped them in the office at a school building, or I've maybe been able to run into a classroom and drop them off. This year with the release, I've had several mornings where I've been able to get into every school in Lewiston and be a guest reader for first graders and share one of Abigail's favorite stories with them, but deliver their books as well. So that's been a really positive and amazing experience for me. If you haven't done it as a school committee member, I would encourage you. If I can do it and I teach high school math and that didn't scare me to death, then but it was a really positive experience, and I'm thankful to the educators that opened their room for me. So at this point, I wanted to keep it brief. I told you I'd keep it brief, so I genuinely and earnestly solicit your feedback. If you have ideas or thoughts that we could work on collaboratively together, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much. I guess I'd just like maybe either Bill or Bobby, whoever's had the most contact with Sam, to just kind of share their thoughts on this process so far.
Yes, thank you. So first I'd like to thank Bobby and the school committee negotiators for, in the negotiating process, being open to this possibility. This was a new thing for us. We really weren't quite sure where it was going to handle. Obviously, Sammy's involved in a lot of things that I may not be necessarily aware of or directly involved in, but I can say that on multiple occasions, and I would say the frequency seems to be increasing, that we've used informal opportunities to get together on the fly and just think about things that, absent that ability to get together right then, maybe we wouldn't have had that contact, and maybe it would have been something that would have ended up in a grievance, or we just wouldn't have thought about something and all the things we should think about. So from my standpoint as a superintendent, it's been a very positive experience, and I very much respect Sammy and her work. We don't always agree, but I believe that she is appropriately fulfilling the role, the responsibility she has to her membership, but also in a way that is really interested and concerned about what's best for Lewiston. So I've been very pleased. Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Hutchinson?
So if you enjoy the first graders, go do the kindergarten class when they double up and bring all the kindergarten kids in. It's even more amazing.
Ms. Roy?
I know one of the initiatives or things that we talked about as part of the goals was to work on strategies for diversification in staff. So any headway on that initiative?
Yeah, so Sean and I had some brainstorming sessions about this, and we did some research, and we had some thoughts and ideas about, instead of expecting diverse staff to come find us in Lewiston, Maine, that maybe it would be worthwhile to go to some HBCUs that have education major, thank you, departments and major, historically black colleges and universities. So we had researched quite a few and made some initial calls, and the obstacle that we ran into wasn't the possibility of doing it, but the financing of it, because as a local, even though our membership has increased, it hasn't increased to a capacity of having us have a local dues revenue that gives us freedom to say we're going to send 2 LEA reps in conjunction with like school district reps. Mind you, this was all like brainstorming, so nothing had like made it to, you know, people needing to know about it at this point. But yeah, I knew that we couldn't support it financially, and I feel like that's where we landed on Sean's side as well, as that his title funds that would have supported that had been tapped out for the year. But I don't think it's a dead-end conversation. I think there are definitely in 2019 ways to reach out to folks in a similar vein through email, through teleconferencing or something, talking with people who are departments of education in those particular colleges and stuff, and see if there's anything that we can do to stir interest, to at least point people to our website, our students, some amazing things that are happening here, to stir interest.
Any other questions, Ms. Ray?
Just a comment, if I might. It seems to me that this is going incredibly well, and I just wanted you to repeat what Portland does again. I feel like I missed that, sorry.
Yeah, so Portland has a full-time release, so their president is not in the classroom at all.
Okay.
Which I don't envy that. I'm glad with the way that we settled it. It's the right thing to do to keep a foot in the classroom and to stay in touch with students. And
yeah, I just want to voice my support for the part-time in the classroom, because I think it keeps you really connected, and it's still in the schools. It sounds like you're able to get to new schools, not just the high school now. But I think that to me seems like the right balance for Lewiston and for the teachers and the support they need here. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Sure. Yeah, if I can reply to that too. I mean, just the amount that I've learned about pre-K to 8 education, being able to be in school spaces, because that's generally how I start my day. I start my day in a different school site, either with members who've asked to meet, or you know, working with an administrative team there about getting their liaison team up and running, or just Q&A with some folks, right? So being able to start my day in those school spaces, generally, it's not every day. So if you're like, well, you weren't here last Tuesday. But then I come back and I do a bunch of emails and stuff, and often have meetings noon and afternoon kind of thing. But it's a great way to start the day, right? Just to open your perspective, because if you're going to represent and speak for educators in Lewiston, it's nice to see what they're working through and the joys that they have in their job and the challenges that they have in their profession as well. So,
Mr. Shabbat?
I would just concur with what both Bill and Sammy's shared. I think it's been a great partnership, and it's been money that has been well spent, in my opinion, from public schools, and just the ability to have those on-the-fly conversations at times, or sit down and have discussions and problem-solve things before they become an issue, is hugely beneficial to everybody. And I've always believed if we take care of our teachers, they'll take care of our kids. And by having this collaboration, I think we're helping our teachers, and in the long run, helping our students. So I think it's fabulous.
Thank you. Ms. Whitlow?
Remind us again what the district had to pay for you for this year. Because wasn't this halftime release wasn't costing the district anything this year? Because of
coincidentally, yes. Jake and our director of student services were able to parse off my other 3 classes. So a new teacher to the district is teaching my financial literacy. He's doing a great job. I just miss it. My baby. And then one of the other sections of pre-cal was picked up by a teacher, which has actually worked out super well, because now I have a team teacher where I was teaching it in isolation in years past. So it's beautiful to have that opportunity for teacher dialogue back and forth about pre-cal. So there wasn't an additional half a person hired to fill the position. And actually, I think you're pulling in a little bit of cash from us. So yeah, so we had the agreement where in the 3 concurrent years of the grant, and this contract cycle, there was particular amounts each year kicked in by all the affiliates, the National Education Association, the Maine Education Association, and LEA.
Any further questions? Jake?
I would just say at the high school that I would also support this effort. Sammy and I have been able to talk on a regular basis about some things, and I agree with her that we're able to resolve things sooner than they need to get, or before they get bigger. But I would add, while there's minimal cost because of the function, we did lose 3 periods of teaching out of our contract. So when we get to budget season, I'm asking for more math teacher. That's part of that piece. Sammy's a good teacher. She's tough to replace.
Boy, it's starting early, Jake. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Bill's in his office all the time.
Okay, agenda item number 10 is to receive and discuss a presentation on Robert's rules. Member Alicia Ray will present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you saw in the packet 2 charts with some of the most commonly used rules of order. Chart 1 takes precedence over chart 2, and in the same manner, motions at the top take precedence over motion towards the bottom. I do not need to go through every motion with you. I think you all know how this works. I think what was my impetus for suggesting that we at least put these charts into at least one agenda was that the chair has set forth kind of a procedure, and he runs the meeting in a slightly less formal way, which is what we've all agreed on, I think, as a school committee. But in cases where kind of motions, unusual motions or motions of precedence come up, it gets a little bit slightly more confusing. And so I just wanted everyone to have these as a resource for when those kind of moments come up. As you saw today, I mean, even withdrawing a motion is like way too complex for what it should be. And so I think these are here for you if you'd like to use them in the formal manner. I'm guessing that meetings won't be super formal at any point because we've agreed to keep it kind of the way that we do it, and I think that's okay. But these are the motions that would most often be used, if anyone has any questions.
So I was just saying that to take a break, we've never used this before this term. I moved to recess for, what would we say, for a break? I moved to recess for
period of time.
Break?
It would be a period of time.
For 5 minutes?
Yeah, it would be a period of time. I don't think that's something we need to use because the chair is receptive as we kind of throw those things out there. But if, you know.
It's good though.
Yeah, it's good to know, I think. And also when things get particularly contentious sometimes or very expansive like tonight's kind of policy discussion, I think referring back to the orders and the motions is something that we can use in those moments to clarify some of that confusion. Again, this is not to limit the way that we've been doing things. This is just for you to have in the back of your mind, back of your pocket, back of your agenda, sort of thing. Yeah, we have them in each packet for council, and I found them pretty helpful, but again, we're not that formal here, so I think it's just good to know what direction we're heading in.
At the Maine School Board Association, there was a big debate about PBL. This was at the fall conference, and move the question. I never heard it before, but I heard it 14 times that day. That's how people shut stuff down, so you're right about that.
move to recess to take a break, then we would then need a second and to vote on that, just to take a break. That seems a little silly. Yeah. Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Like, this is the formal way of doing things. We have agreed as a group to do it in a more informal manner, and I think that's totally appropriate for the size of the body and the relationships that we all have. If those two things ever break down in some manner, then this is a really great place to move back to if we start yelling or anything. Wrestling. It hasn't happened yet, so... Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so I've got quite a bit. I apologize because last meeting we didn't make it this far, but here we are. We met on February 5th. We talked about a number of things, including a discussion of use for the Violations Bureau. I know that the School Committee and Facilities Committee specifically looked at the Violations Bureau as a possible building to be used, not entirely appropriate for school and educational purposes, it sounds like. However, we have looked at it in terms of using it for specialized police department teams and renting out part of it to the MDA. So because it was a former courthouse, it's basically a fortress with its 3 windows, and so that would be a far more applicable use. And it seems that a portion of the council, I can't speak for the whole council, was supportive of moving forward with that. So there is a possibility of generating some revenue from the MDEA renting it out. And also there will be greater collaboration among police force teams and their different task forces that they have. So that seems amenable. That's a great question that came up, and I actually misspoke at the council meeting and then corrected myself to all councilors. That is the goal because they do not want the council has a goal of not having law enforcement personnel in the same building as students. And so good if we move students out, yes, but also even better if we move law enforcement agents out of there as well. So that was discussed, and they would move out of the armory into that space. Seems like a win.
Do they pay rent to the Lewiston Public Schools to be in the armory? No, they. Okay, just
that is to the city.
To the city. Yeah. Okay.
I just wondered that. Is that going to be a lot of empty space? Is that going to be used for expanding the senior program? Or?
In the armory?
Yeah.
TBD. Great. So another thing that we talked about, and I think you'll all be interested about, we talked about solid waste and recycling issues in Lewiston and also the perception of Lewiston. There is a lot of myth that exists about Lewiston as a place and how clean we are because there are a lot of issues with solid waste and with recycling in town. And so we had a pretty large discussion about ways to address this. And so we're going to hopefully take on an image campaign that also involves a lot of education about solid waste policy, what the ordinances are, and ways that people can find recycling resources. A lot of folks who live in kind of multi-unit buildings, it's harder for the landlords to work with the city for their solid waste, so they do it privately. And so there's just a whole lot of complication there. And also, do tenants follow what the landlord set out? It's really conflated. And so we're hoping to have kind of a trash amnesty program where we talk to people about what their barriers are to disposing of their waste properly, and then we remove those barriers once we've identified what they are for a little bit and see how that works. So I think that's something that could be really great. They talked a lot about education in the schools, which I don't know if they've talked to LPS about yet, but I think that could be a really good way to start addressing some. Great. and Doug's been great for this. So I'm really curious to see where it goes from here. And also notices would be sent through, I believe, tax bills, and so people would definitely see them. And then we had a public hearing on the FY 2020 LCIP. No comments were made. Tomorrow night we have a workshop starting at 6 p.m. where we will be talking about the Community Development Block Grant Program, and we have to bring that into alignment with the HUD guidelines from the federal government. We'll also be discussing Lake Auburn alum treatment. You might have heard a lot about water filtration and the health of our drinking water at Lake Auburn. As a Water Protection Commissioner, it's fine as far as the Water Protection Commission has tested over time, but I expect that to be a robust conversation. We're also talking about marijuana regulation tomorrow. Bring all your opinions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Miss Ray. So I just had two quick things. One, we wrapped up the superintendent search, and that was tough. I mean, that was a lot of meetings for us, especially for folks on, some of the bigger committees where you were meeting, twice, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day. So I really appreciate all the work this committee's done over the last several months. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the hard work that Bobby put into this. I mean, it was just non-stop for her. Oh. You really did an outstanding job guiding us through this process, and I hope we didn't make it too difficult for you. I know Luke every now and then kind of, but we truly, as a committee, we really appreciate it, Bobby. And that's it for my report. So on to the superintendent report.
So just a few things. The governor released her budget report on Friday, and in it did have the mill rate expectation for local communities on education, and it's going down from last year. So I'm assuming that from a tax standpoint, that's good for Lewiston taxpayers. We don't get the detail though until Friday, so stay tuned on that. The new DOE commissioner, Pender Macon, is going to be visiting Lewiston through Nate Libby's work on March 4th, and I'm going to meet with Nate later this week to talk about his schedule. And our goal is to expose her to the good and bad in Lewiston and the challenges that we have, and having a commissioner with that direct experience is going to be helpful. Many of you may have seen my
a chance to talk with Tina about this, but if Tina is for this, I'd like to look at the makeup of the teaching and learning subcommittee, possibly adding teachers and students. At least let's have a conversation again about that. I know that Tina might feel different about it because we've done so much work, and bringing new people in sometimes can put the work on hold because we have to catch people up. But I do feel like we may not get the work done we need if we only have certain point of views.
Okay. So at this point, I don't think we need any discussion about it. We'll plan on putting on it. I'll reach out to Tina and have a discussion with her, unless somebody really feels they want to chime in. But let me just. Okay, go ahead.
I would just like to say that we have asked for that since the inception of that subcommittee. So it had kind of fallen on deaf ears many times, and I think we probably just stopped asking. So I don't think Tina would disagree that was not desirable, but I won't speak for her.
Yes, I will chime in. Here's the thing, the ad hoc committee is an ad hoc committee. It's not the same subcommittee it was before. Yes, we've asked for it from day one. No, we haven't gotten it. Yes, it's fallen on deaf ears. We have limited time to make this recommendation and all the changes that may or may not have to come with this. If you look back at our meeting earlier tonight, having just 2 teachers come in as guests and to decide they wanted their input threw us all over the place. So if teachers were going to be added to this subcommittee, I think it would be on myself and Sean to figure out who those teachers would be so we could get a mix, because tonight it was stacked one way. Whether they were invited by somebody or not is anybody's guess, but I think we need to leave who is invited to join that committee up to myself and Sean, because I think there could be a push to stack it.
Well, I believe it's a chair. A chair has the authority of that appointment, correct? So we wouldn't have to worry about stacking because we would. So we can have further discussion about that, though. One thing I think one piece that's been missing is not enough committee discussions with the subcommittee to provide guidance. So I know time is limited, but I'll tell you the next recommendation comes out of the subcommittee. We've got to get it we've got to get it right because it's going to hopefully be a long-term solution that we're not coming back next year and dealing with issues. So great work by the subcommittee, because that's the tough place to be and has been since I've been on the committee. So I know you guys probably feel the same.
I just want to, I just like to throw this out in terms of the phrase "getting it right." What getting it right means is that they're come up with a recommendation that this board hopefully unanimously can support, and with everyone in the room pulling in the same direction. I think that's what we shoot for. There's more than one way to go, but hopefully by working together and coming up with an approach that people are very comfortable with and sticking with it, that we'll get it right.
The one thing that has become an issue is, like, we scheduled to meet tonight and we had to be out at 6 for a workshop at 6. We have members that work and can't get to a subcommittee meeting before 5, so it's really limiting the time we have to we get into the discussion and then we have to stop it midway through. I would have loved to have gone another 45 minutes tonight on just the one topic we were discussing, and we couldn't. We had to stop to come into a school committee meeting. And so our limited time, because of other things going on with committee members, is going to be an issue.
And do you consider meeting off school committee nights?
Our next one is off on school committee night then with negotiation, it's still.
Yeah, I think Lucy has access to the school committee schedule, and we just need to work it. We could probably identify at least a few dates over the next month and a half. Well, at this point, the charge ends March 31st, so what is every day that's available between now and March 31st, the committee should be aware of.
All right, so we've turned, yeah, we just, oh, go ahead.
Season coming too.
All right, so we're discussing putting some, if I could, just so we, I'm already like way over tonight and I'm feeling bad, and Francis has his hand raised, but we're having discussion about something just to put on the agenda, so we have to be careful, Francis.
All right, so I just want to clarify what the future agenda item in our discussion, and just a point of clarity, I know folks have said it's been on deaf ears, and Mr. Webster can clarify that I've spoken to him about the makeup of teaching and learning multiple times, and Tina can probably verify that as well. We just never got any headway with it. So it might be that if it's a future agenda item, that it's a discussion among the board to talk about the makeup of this teaching and learning subcommittee, because that's pretty much the only way we're going to charge the superintendent to do it, because in all of my discussions, it just never got done. So that's one thing. And then another future agenda item would be to talk about professional development, or in the case of like an after-school program to support our students, and the kind of the discussion that we talked about tonight. So in C, it might be a workshop in a sense of what do we currently have, and is there any room for improvement or sustaining what we have? For example, 21st Century, we used to have a big grant. That grant has dwindled down. Do we want to keep it dwindled down, or do we want to expand that? And then other programs as well. But I'd like to see that as a future agenda item or a workshop. So thank you.
Good.
Because I'll speak to the chair, and because I think we did have a number of conversations about it. It's not simple in terms of what are we trying to achieve. Are we trying to find 2 teachers that somehow represent 500 teachers in the district? How do we make that selection? Are they going to be expect to be paid for? There are a lot of issues, but we'll talk about it. I'll bring you up to date. Thank you.
Good. Ms. Ray.
Thank you. I didn't want to make this announcement during my city council update, but I did want to make sure everyone got their invitation to the Lewiston Education Fund grant recipient reception. We need to rename that. It will be here at the Dingley building, honoring some of our teachers. So it's supposed to be prior. It starts at 5:30 on my calendar. I will verify with the. Okay, I'll double check with the board president. But yeah, it just is a good way to honor our teachers and also thank the Education Fund, because they do a lot of work to help support non-budgetary projects. So.
Ms. Roy.
Just a future agenda item.
Thank you. All right. Yeah.
Chronic absenteeism is, I went to a DOE training held by Count Me In, and I know it's one of the non-academic indicators that we've discussed, and I think it would be important to learn more about where we sit with our data in the district. I have the slides, I'll send it to you guys.
And just real quick, Ms. Whitlow, was there an item you had suggested recently about a workshop?
Yeah, I've got it on the workshop list. I don't remember what it was, but
Okay.
I have 4 things on the list. and
Okay,
I would-
so can we, we actually have probably more workshop items listed now than we could ever get done, but I could be mistaken. Go ahead.
I don't remember ever suggesting anything, but Monique and I did have a conversation about the problem with vaping in our schools and on our buses, and yeah.
Okay, so we probably should get a list written up so that as a committee we can kind of look at and prioritize. Yeah. All right, so I'm at a point now that I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Second. Hutchinson and yeah. All in favor? Thank you so much, everybody. You guys did a great job tonight.